Here we are, the space I rented.
This is it? It's just nothing but a dark blank space.
Ah, hold on. Ah! Watch where you're going, you mother. Oh my god. We found it. We found the freaking Disney vault that people were discussing for years.
Well, that's great and all. Wait, what happened to my old OC?
Oh yeah, you needed an upgrade, since using Thomas as an OC was getting old, in my opinion.
Well, why didn't you just make me into an engine OC instead?
Because the landlord hates talking trains. Plus, you wouldn't be able to fit in the room anyway.
Well, I guess it could have looked worse. So, this is the vault I've heard much about as a kid. I think you just rented out this room that has the Disney vault with it.
I didn't know this thing was here. They just offered me this room before we even started working on every episode of Thomas and Friends Season 7 reviewed. Hey, at least we had the vault to ourselves.
Yeah,
So, shall we?
let's see what we got.
Now, where is that original 1940 version of Fantasia? It has to exist.
Huh. Looks like Disney was also planning on releasing Song of the South after all on VHS. Dang. You know, come to think of it, I guess it's not too much of a stretch to see why Disney wanted to keep these movies in here for a while. There's so many of them.
You're right. There's so much film content in here that I don't even know where to start. Maybe we should start with the entire Walt Disney Animation Studios catalog.
Makes sense. You know, I would make a smart-ass statement that Disney was just being cheap with you because they're too busy with their new streaming service now. But at the same time, I can't deny that this is somewhat a good deal. I may not be the biggest fan of Disney, but their history is something that sometimes interests me, and a couple of their movies are pretty good.
Yeah, indeed. Well, geez, if we're gonna review movies, we've picked a good place to begin. And since I heard that the vault was no longer going to be used, thanks in part to Disney Plus, we can stay here as long as we want.
Well, let's at least find something comfy to sit on. Plus, we'll need to see if there's a computer somewhere around here, too.
Did you forget that I brought my laptop with me?
How did you... I'm not even gonna ask. Let's just start watching these movies, alright?
Sounds fine with me. Well, let's read some history first, and then we'll review our first movie together, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs.
Born in Chicago, Illinois on December the 5th, 1901, a man by the name of Walt Disney loved drawing. There wasn't a moment in his life where Walt would do some artwork, whether for himself or for someone else. When he wasn't working as a newspaper boy or going to school, he would start attending night courses at the Chicago Academy of Fine Arts. Soon after his service in World War I as an ambulance driver, he would move to Kansas and he got a job at the Pensman Rubin Commercial Arts Studio, drawing commercial illustrations, theater programs, and catalogs. It was from there that he met a friend and future animator, Herb Iwerks. It was during this time around the 1910s that the two friends noticed a new genre of film began to take shape, animation. Most notably, it was cel animation that got both Walt and Iwerks interested in the media, and they wanted to try their hand at it. So with the help of Fred Hartman, they created their first animated studio, known as Laugh-O-Grams. The Laugh-O-Grams were like a prototype to Walt and his team when they began their animated projects. Even at an early start, their films were based on known fairy tales, like Cinderella, Little Red Riding Hood, and Jack and the Beanstalk. Walt and Herb hired some animators at the studio, and they had a good run with the studio. But then they had to file for bankruptcy in 1923, just when they were ready for Walt's first series, the Alice comedies, starting with Alice's Wonderland. Thankfully, with the help of Roy, Walt's brother, they brought a one-way ticket to Hollywood, California, where on October 16th, 1923, they set up a new studio called the Disney Brothers Cartoon Studio, which would later be known as today, the Walt Disney Company.
From there, Walt made two known series for his studio, the first being the Alice's Comedies, as mentioned from 1923 to 1927, which was an early example of live action mixed with animation. But Walt wanted his next series to be fully animated, so with the help of Iwerks, the two created their first animated cartoon character, known as Oswald the Lucky Rabbit in 1927. The series was going well, but the studio distributing the series, Universal Pictures, and film producer Charles Mintz, wanted to reduce the payments for the shorts, and even threatened Walt that he'll make his own studio and produce the series if he didn't agree to the term. At this point, there was nothing Walt could do, seeing as how Mintz owned the rights to the shorts, so he declined his offer and it was back to the drawing board for both Walt and Ub to create a new character. Luckily, it didn't take them long to create their new cartoon character, the one and only Mickey Mouse. Originally going to be named Mortimer, but Walt's wife Lillian thought the name Mickey sounded better. There were already 2 shorts starring Mickey that were in the works and were used as test screening, one titled Plain Crazy and another titled The Galloping Gaucho, the former of which me and Sokoa reviewed on this channel before, so if you want to check out that review, check the link in the description. Anyway, it was at this point that sound was starting to change the way movies were made, with the huge success of Jazz Singer in 1927. So Walt decided to try his hand at synchronized sound in his third Mickey Mouse short, the one we all know and love, Steamboat Willie. Now we may talk about this short at a later date, so just in case, to spare you the long story, the short was a major success for the studio, and it rightfully put Mickey Mouse at the spotlight, and he became an animated icon to this day. With the success of both Mickey Mouse and Walt's new animated series, Silly Symphony, the studio was looking at a good turnout, but Walt knew that making just shorts probably wasn't going to keep the company afloat for long. And around the 1930s, that's when he decided he needed to make a full-length feature film. But what story should he adapt as his first animated film?
At first, he was going to do Babes in Toyland, after RKO, the studio that would distribute most of the Disney films, was going to give Disney the rights into making their first animated feature. But unfortunately for Disney, Hal Roach, the director responsible for The Little Rascals and Laurel and Hardy shorts, beat Disney in getting the rights to the film and turned it into a Laurel and Hardy movie instead. Walt was also thinking of doing a live-action/animated Alice in Wonderland film, starring Mary Pickford as Alice, but he quickly pulled back on that plan after seeing that Paramount also had the idea and made their own version in 1933. So he's going to have to wait a good 20 years before coming back to that piece. Then he got it. Walt went back to the time where he was still a newspaper boy during his teenage years, back around 1916, where he saw a silent film that changed his life forever. So one fateful evening, in 1934, after treating his animators for dinner, they went back to the studio and Walt acted out the story for what would become his first animated feature film, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs.
With Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs chosen to be his first animated feature film, production on the animated film began in June of 1934 with a budget of $250,000. However, not everyone was particularly fond of Walt's idea of producing an animated feature film. You see, back in those days, the idea of making a cartoon that lasted more than 10 minutes was unheard of. So much so that when Walt announced his plans to make Snow White, the people in the Hollywood movie industry took this as a joke and referred to the movie as Disney's Folly. But even with all the doubts and people making fun of him, it didn't even put a negative emotion on Walt, as his determination and dedication made him ignore all those who thought that his movie would be a joke and a failure. Although, even with the determination, even Walt and his animators also showed some doubts about this movie, so they made it their goal to make sure that this movie was not your typical fun little silly cartoon. They were going to make it to where the story and characters would be so believable that you can also grow attached to these characters to a point where you can laugh, smile, and yes, even cry with or for them. To achieve this goal, Walt and his team made a 21-page booklet titled Snow White Suggestions for any ideas that might stick and be put in the movie, and as you can imagine, there were a lot of ideas the team had for the movie. Some were kept, some went through some minor or major changes, and others were scrapped altogether.
One of the scenes that was scripted involved the prince. He was originally going to be trapped in the Evil Queen's castle dungeon, and he had to escape to rescue Snow White. However, his role was significantly downgraded to a very minor role in the final film, due to the animators having a bit of a trouble animating the characters. You see, going with the idea to make sure the movie is taken seriously, the team knew they can't just use the usual cartoon physics we've seen from their past shorts. If they wanted the audience to feel that the cartoon character was real, then they not only had to make them look real, but make them feel real with the way they moved. Luckily for the team of animators, Walt would make sure that he and his new team of animators would learn how to draw animated characters again by having them sent to night art school. And while working on Snow White, Walt figured that using his silly symphony shorts would be perfect on learning some animation tricks and techniques that could be used for his feature, and they would also be using it to testing out new equipment. One particular piece of equipment that would be used heavily for Snow White and future Disney productions was a huge camera known as the multiplane camera, which could process a number of pieces of artwork past the camera at various speeds and at a various distance from one another. This creates a sense of parallax or depth. This device was made by William Nardity for Walt to test it out with Snow White, and Walt and his team also used it for one of their silly symphony shorts, The Old Mill, in 1937. So that was one of the techniques the team of animators used. Another technique that they also used that helped them out majorly was an all-known animation technique known as rotoscoping. Basically, in a nutshell, rotoscoping is a way animators use to get an idea of how humans, or just any certain living creature, moves. First, you would film an actual living being, whether it's an animal or a person. Then you would take that film strip and start tracing over it, and soon you got your piece of animation. This was used mostly for the prince, the queen, and for Snow White, so they won't have to worry about the characters moving like rubber or anything like that. And you can see the rotoscoping in the film itself, most notably with the dancing scene, where the model for Snow White, March Champion, was called in to dance for the animators to film and then animate, and out of all of the human characters, the animators said that the queen was the easiest to draw, saying that she was the most real and complex as a woman. Now, while Walt wanted this movie to be taken seriously, he wasn't afraid to throw in any light jokes in the movie itself, and he felt that the animals and the dwarves would be the perfect characters to throw in some gags. In fact, to keep the animators working, Walt gave his animators $5 for any gags they were able to come up with for the movie.
When it came time to the dwarves, Walt wanted them to have more major roles in the movie, and not only did he want them to be named, but he also wanted them to have their personalities match up with the names they were given. The dwarves had more than 50 potential names that were initially planned for them. These names included Jumpy, Deafy, Burpy, Wheezy, Baldy, Sniffy, and many more. But in the end, they settled on Doc, Bashful, Sneezy, Grumpy, Happy, Sleepy, and Dopey. The animators loved the dwarves so much that there were a lot of animated scenes featuring the characters, so much so that they were going to be the main focus of the movie rather than Snow White. But Walt and his animators figured this would not be the best move, so they made sure that the movie will be more focused on Snow White and the Queen, and they had to make sure the dwarves didn't halt the story in any way. So a lot of scenes had to be either trimmed, like the scene where Grumpy and Doc arguing on whether Snow White should stay or not, or there will be some scenes that were cut from the movie altogether. For example, there were two scenes that were cut from the movie. One involved the dwarves and Snow White's animal friends making a bet for Snow White, and of course the famous soup song, where Snow White tries to get the dwarves to eat the soup like gentlemen. Now, the soup song was originally going to be in the movie. However, Walt had to cut it due to time constraints, and the animator that animated the sequence, named Ward Kimball, was actually crushed when he heard that that scene was cut from the film. He was super close to leaving the Disney studio, but Walt managed to have him stay as he had another project for Ward to animate for his next feature. What was he asked to animate? Well, you have to wait and see for yourselves next time.
When it came time for the songs, Walt hired Frank Churchill and Larry Moree for the score, and to compose the songs, while Paul J. Smith and Lane Harline composed the incidental score. 25 songs were chosen for the movie, and only 8 of them were picked for the final pieces for the movie. Some we all know to this day, like Hi Ho, Whistle While You Work, Someday My Prince Will Come, and many more. Fun fact, the song for Someday My Prince Will Come was going to feature a fantasy segment with Snow White dancing with the prince. But the animators didn't want the segment to distract the story, so they just had Snow White singing it instead, with the dwarves just listening to her singing. And the silly song was going to be in a different title, You're Never Too Old to Be Young. But the team decided that the silly song would be much better, but much like the soup song, you can hear the original version of this song on YouTube. And now it's time to talk about voice casting. There's not too much to say on this for all the characters, but there are some cool facts about some of them that they're worth mentioning. Let's go over the minor ones first. Now, when it came to casting the voices for these characters, Walt figured since this was an animated movie that it would be better to audition the actors based on their voice rather than their looks. When Billy Gilbert heard that one of the dwarfs was going to be named Sneezy, he called up Walt and did his famous sneeze gag. He immediately got the part. Originally, Dopey was going to have a speaking role in the movie, and he was going to be voiced by Mel Blanc. Yes, that Mel Blanc. Unfortunately, Walt and his animators decided that Dopey should be a mute character instead, so any lines that Walt had recorded for Dopey are now sadly lost. For the Queen, Walt chose famous silent film actress Lucilla Lon Verne, and this was her last film role in her career before her death in 1945 due to cancer. When it was time for her to do the old hag's voice, after the Queen had been transformed, Lucilla took out her teeth and gave such a perfect voice for the character that it left the animators speechless with how perfect she was for the part. But the most interesting voice cast for the whole movie is the voice of Snow White herself. Walt wanted the perfect voice to match Snow White's grace and young age of 14. Diane Durbin, being 14 herself when the movie was in the works, tried her part for the role, but Walt felt her voice sounded too mature to fit his character. Well, if a 14-year-old actress can't voice a 14-year-old character, how about an 18-year-old actress voicing a 14-year-old character? Enter Andrea Castellani. She had just finished working at MGM as a choir girl and a session singer, when one day, while she was at her parents' house, she overheard a phone conversation in which Walt was asking her father if he knew of any suitable voices for Snow White. She then approached him, suggesting herself for the role. After auditioning for the part in September 1934, she was offered the part and accepted it. However, little did she know that Walt would also fuck and sadly destroy her entire career.
She was under a very strict contract from Walt and was not allowed to work or lend her voice to any other film or radio business even after the film was released. The reason? Because he didn't want to spoil the illusion of Snow White. After recording the lines for Snow White, she was paid a total of $970. But there is a happy ending to her story. While she had to get very minor roles in two other movies like The Wizard of Oz and It's a Wonderful Life, she was finally able to get a Disney Legend Award in 1994, just 3 years before she sadly passed away at the age of 80 on January 18, 1997. One interesting fun fact about Castellani is that she re-recorded the song I'm Wishing at the age of 75 when the Snow White Grotto at Disneyland was refurbished in 1990.
I'm wishing for the one I love to find me today. I'm hoping, and I'm dreaming of the nice things he'll say.
Yes, even at that age, she could still do the voice. Now, while the film was getting close to completion, and Walt was passionate about the project, that doesn't mean he ever had his share of nervous breakdowns or fears. He did start wondering if what the others were saying about this project would be true, and that who would want to sit through a feature-length cartoon. But after he and his family took a summer trip to Europe in 1935, Walt was invited to the League of Nations in Paris to receive an award for his cartoons. And at that theater, they were showing 6 of Walt's cartoons in a row, and the audiences were cheering, laughing, and they were just having such a good time that this moment right there is what Walt needed to be convinced that an audience would sit through an animated feature film. And while that's all fine and good, there is still a major problem that Walt had to face to get this movie going: money.
The movie took so much production time that it ended up sucking up all the money that the studio had left. This caused the movie's budget to rise above the roof from $250,000 to $1.5 million. And keep in mind that this film was made when the Great Depression was still happening, so Walt couldn't just ask for money so easily. He had to mortgage his own house for this movie. He even went as far as to convince an executive at the Bank of America to lend them the money by showing him an unfinished version of the film. The banker liked the film and saw potential for the movie, but unfortunately that wasn't enough to cover the costs. By this time, Walt's wife, Linda, and his brother and financial supporter of the company, Walt Disney, were getting fed up with Walt using so much money, and they both tried their best to make Walt stop the production of Snow White, but they didn't get that far. So Walt and his team of animators had no choice. If they wanted this film to succeed, they had to finish it with all the money that was left for them. They already promised RKO that the film would be ready, and it was supposed to come out in 1936, but they had to push it back just one more year, and after 4 years of hard work, the film was finally done and had its premiere on December 21st, 1937, at the Carthay Circle Theater in Los Angeles, California. Now all Walt had to do was just pray that all of his hard work will be worth it, and it will pay off everything he and his team had worked for, because if not, it was going to be goodbye to Walt Disney Productions. Well, I've had my history with Disney before, and I have watched some of these animated films a long time ago. Some I remember more than others, and Snow White was one of those films I remember loving, and after watching this movie again, it still holds up. So, let's talk about the animation. Good God, those animations still hold up great. Alright, sure, there might be some hiccups with the backgrounds or the character movements, but even still, you can see all the animators and Walt's dedication and hard work within this film. These sets are still beautiful to look at. I mean, just look at the water. Even the water looks real enough for you to stick your hand into it. The same thing can be said about these characters. They did a really good job capturing Snow White's grace. She not only acts polite, but she feels so real, like you can actually see a beautiful woman like her in real life. The same thing can be said for the Queen, and how expressive she is towards her stepdaughter. You can feel that hate and jealousy going directly at her. Walt wasn't kidding when he said he wanted these characters to be taken seriously, and he and his animator succeeded in finding the balance of comedy to serious moments between these characters. Speaking of which, Walt picked a good story to start off with as his first feature film. It's sometimes a breath of fresh air to see a story that's just simple and fun to watch. We don't always need a complex story with a villain that has a tragic backstory, or a main character that's just too perfect. Just a simple story with characters that are simple and easy to follow is really all we need. Now sure, you can argue that the characters might be too simple, and sometimes one note with characters like Snow White, the Prince, and even with the Dwarfs. But on the other hand, there are some traits these characters have that make them memorable for a reason. Take Snow White for example. Yeah, everyone likes to make fun of her for being a typical damsel in distress that's a bit too nice and naive at times, and to be fair, I make fun of that too. But there's also more to her when it comes to her relationship with the dwarves. She takes very good care of them and becomes a mother figure to them. Like the scene where she makes them wash their hands or they get no dinner. It shows that even though she is nice, she's no pushover. She's a character that anyone can look up and relate to. The Queen is another animated character that's also different the more we see of her. In her original form, you see a jealous old woman that will do anything to kill her own stepdaughter. And then as the movie goes on, you see her going batshit crazy as she transforms herself into a witch and kills Snow White herself. The performance that Lucilla gives to the witch, as well as the animators and the editing giving her the right shadows and shots to make her look creepy, again, it makes her into a very memorable villain for a reason.
Thirsty? Have a drink.
I won't talk too much about the dwarves in case Toy Bonnie has something to say about them, but what I will say is that these characters are, again, memorable for a reason, and it's no wonder why the team had a tough time deciding which scenes to keep and which ones should they remove. You can do a lot of scenes with these characters playing off their traits with one another. Anyways, I'll also leave the story alone for now. There's nothing too much to analyze or talk about. Again, just a simple story to follow. And yeah, some scenes can drag out for a while, but it still flows nicely that it doesn't really bother me that much. The music and score for the movie is still as catchy and as memorable as I remember. The songs Hi Ho, The Silly Song, Someday My Prince Will Come, and many others are still great songs to listen to, and they help with the pace of this movie. The score overall also helps place with the tone and the scenes quite well. Some leave you on the edge of your seat like the final chase scene, or make you scared like the scene where the huntsman is about to kill Snow White. Overall, for Disney's first attempt at a feature film, this film definitely went out as a banger. I couldn't imagine the look on the audience's faces and the naysayers that thought this movie was going to bomb. It goes to show that with dedication and support, you can make anything work, and all that hard work will pay off in some way and in some form. To this day, it's still a good movie and a good animated film in my opinion. It probably won't win the modern audiences, But if you're an animated buff or a die-hard Disney fan, this is a much watch for a simple story, great animation and music, nice characters, and just something to appreciate, as this was the movie that helped kick-started the Disney Studios into feature films, and it's no mystery as to why. For my score, I'm going to give Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs an 8 out of 10 for a good movie.
Disney's Folly? I don't think so, because this is a phenomenal movie. Although, I'll be honest, it took me years to really give this movie the love and respect it really deserves. But now that I watched it a number of times, I think this movie is the perfect way to start the Disney movie catalog. I can't help but to agree with Sekoa. Walt picked the perfect story to adapt as his first feature-length film. The animation is so godlike, believable, that you can really feel you're a part of this magical universe. I can't express how mind-blown I am at this beautiful work of art. And even with the smallest detail, it doesn't disappoint. The animation does its job correctly. It makes you feel different emotions as you go look at the background. It also makes you believe in the characters. For example, you can feel terrified and sometimes scared at the trees and plants as Snow White runs away into the forest. You can fall in love with the characters because of their different traits and personalities, and you can even get emotional when the dwarves are crying over the loss of their beloved mother figure. That is what every animated feature should do. Have the audience believe in the characters, and Snow White nails that brilliantly. The characters are really likable. I love Snow White a lot. She is a very good character, and I really like how the movie portrays her as this young, innocent girl that is just so beautiful and charming that you can't help but to feel sorry for all the trouble that she's gonna go through in the movie. There are some moments in the movie where you can feel worried for her, and you can even get emotional once she eats the poisoned apple and falls into a permanent sleep. Now, I also admit that there are some parts where she acts a little bit weird, and she's really naive at times. Like when she found the dwarves' cottage and she just enters as if it was her own home. But does that make the movie bad? No. In fact, that adds more to the movie because it shows that, yeah, even the young can be naive at times, but they can also be very respectful and helpful sometimes. The Queen is another character that I absolutely love in this movie. The way the animators animated her makes you truly believe and understand that she's a very strict person, and when she gets jealous, she gets super jealous. The animators and her voice actress did an outstanding job at capturing her personality as a jealous and snobby queen that will get what she desires no matter what. When she later transforms into the old hag, you can really feel horrified and sometimes uncomfortable as to how ugly and disfigured she looks. I can't imagine how many kids who saw this film when it came out got scared as to how the queen looked after her transformation. I will admit, I scratched myself a few times because of how disturbing and creepy she looked at times, especially with those really skinny fingers of hers. Now, I may be in the minority here, and if you disagree with me, that's fine, but the way she dies is kind of simple. Don't get me wrong, it's still creepy, fantastic, and also a pretty dark death, but I feel her death was just plain and simple. Now, the dwarves. I love the dwarves. I love that Walt and his team gave them names and different personalities to make them likable and relatable to the audience. First, we have Doc, who is the self-appointed leader of the group, and quite a charming character who has trouble saying stuff. Then we have Happy, who is one of my favorite characters in the film since I can relate to his personality whenever I'm happy. Sneezy is a hilarious character that I always find funny whenever he lets out that loud sneeze. Bashful is a nice and cute little character who I find really charming whenever Snow White says something that makes him blush. You can't have the dwarves without having Sleepy and his trademark fly that bothers him a lot while he's trying to take a nap. The Grouch Grumpy is also a really likable character, though at first you may think that he's going to be a really unlikable character who's going to bash and criticize Snow White for everything she does. But as the movie progresses, you can really tell that he secretly has feelings for her, and he also worries for her. And last but certainly not least, we have Dopey, who is just that, Dopey. He's the youngest of all the dwarves and the only one that can't speak, and he's kind of like the goofball and laughingstock of the other dwarves. Dopey is a really funny character. I laughed at some of the scenes that he was featured in, my favorite being when he was saying shh to the door. Overall, all of the dwarves are really good characters, and I can't help but smile every time they come on screen. Now, what about the songs in the movie? Holy crap, they're so memorable and good that you can't get them out of your head. I'm Wishing is a classic Disney song that's been stuck in my head since I entered my teens, and I can't help but to hum it every once in a while. That's how good it is. Though I can certainly understand why a few people find the song a little annoying. Adriana Caselotti does this falsetto that can get on some people's nerves, but to be honest, it really doesn't bother me. Hi-Ho is a catchy little tune I've always liked since I was a very little kid, and the sequence it was featured on will forever be stuck in my head because of how beautifully it was animated. Someday My Prince Will Come is a beautiful song that serves as a prelude to what has become my favorite song of all time, the finale to Love's First Kiss, which in other words is the song that's played at the very end of the movie. I fucking adore this song. The way that chorus sings the song with emotion is just so beautiful and memorable, and the ending, oh my god, the ending is just so amazing. The ending is just the most amazing thing I've ever heard. The way the chorus brings the energy to the song, and the way it makes the movie end, is just so amazing. I can go on and on about how I love this song. But anyway, enough about me gushing about Love's First Kiss. Let's get to my final thoughts on the movie. Well, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. What can I say that hasn't been said about this masterpiece? I really love this movie. Sure, the story was simplified to make it work as an animated film, but good golly, it was worth it. This movie proves that you don't always need a complex story to make a movie work. You can always try to make it short and simple as long as it's filled with great humor, funny gags, great animation, and really memorable characters that your audience can relate to. So with the godlike animation, great characters, amazing and memorable music numbers, and a good story, the Disney movie that started it all gets my top recommendation and also my highest rating, 5 stars out of 5, which equals a 10 out of 10 for an amazing movie.
Disney and his company took a lot of risk for this movie when it was first released. I can't imagine the look on the staff's face just seeing almost everyone in Hollywood coming down just to see this movie. From the people that said this movie was going to bomb, to famous actors and directors at the time like Charlie Chaplin, Shirley Temple, Judy Garland, and many others. Just imagine the pure excitement mixed in with the sheer amount of fear that Walt was going through during this whole movie. But when the lights were dim and the movie played, there were a lot of different emotions and reactions from the crowd during this movie. From the crowd laughing with the dwarves, to the children winning the theater seats from the creepy forest scene, and there was even talk of audience actually crying when Snow White had died in the film. In the end, the audience stood up and applause were heard far and wide. The people that doubted this movie were left speechless with how wrong they were. Even before the film was getting ready to be shown in other theaters, critics and well-known film directors like Charlie Chaplin and Russian director Sergei Nastine called it the greatest film ever made, and lots of other critics agreed with them, like Time magazine putting Walt and his Seven Dwarfs on the cover of one of their recent issues at the time, and Variety calling the film to be so perfect, so tender in its romance and fantasy, so emotional with its characters and the actors performing them that the film approaches real greatness. The film was such a hit that other studios like MGM and the Fletcher Studios tried to rival Disney in creating something like Snow White, with MGM's own fantasy color film, The Wizard of Oz, and Fletcher's own animated film, Gulliver's Travels, both released in 1939, and films I may talk about at some point. Not only was the film so popular in terms of inspiring other directors, but it was also so popular that Hollywood couldn't put it in one of their film categories at their 10th Academy Awards because it was the only animated feature film at the time. So the best they could do was to give Walt a special honorary award at their next special, given by none other than Shirley Temple, the famous award that had 1 big Oscar and 7 little ones. Okay, that's actually pretty cool and cute, not gonna lie.
Isn't it bright and shiny?
Oh, it's beautiful.
Aren't you proud of it, Mr. Disney?
Well, I'm so proud I think I'll bust.
Today, you can see that award at the Walt Disney Family Museum located in San Francisco, California. Now, at the box office, the movie was a big success, and Walt was lucky he released this film in 1937. Keep that year in mind when we get to his other films later. But with all the money that Walt had used to make this movie happen, it brought back more than enough to save everything he risked his life for. At the American and Canada market, it made $4.2 million on its initial release, beating out another successful sound film, Jazz Singer. But also, according to RKO, the film made an additional $7,846,000 internationally, bringing it to a total of $12,046,000 on its original run, and it was the biggest box office movie ever made. Until Gone with the Wind came along and stole that title. But hey, even with the re-releases that Snow White has had over the few years, the film still made a total of $418 million of all of its releases. So it was still very successful. Walt would use some of that initial box office money to finance a $4.5 million studio in Burbank, California, now known as the Walt Disney Studios. But that's not including the amount of merchandising and other stuff the film would get later.
Well, speaking of the merchandise, Snow White is credited as the first film to have merchandise released on the same day as the film. There was everything from dolls, crystal plates, dresses, puzzles, puppets, figurines, and even the first feature film soundtrack released on phonographic records. The film's popularity would later inspire various rides at the Disney parks. In Disneyland, Snow White is the star of her very own attraction, Snow White's Adventures, now called Snow White's Enchanted Wish as of 2021, which opened on the same day as the park did in 1955. The attraction was so popular in Disneyland that it was duplicated for Disney's second theme park, Walt Disney World, where it opened on the same day as the park in 1971. And this version, oh god, it was epically terrifying and horrifying. But thankfully, a 1994 update removed the truly terrifying ride, and the ride was basically rewritten from scratch to follow a simple storyline from the movie. Sadly, the ride was shut down in 2012 to make room for a fucking meet and greet. Anyways, the ride was also duplicated for Disney's other theme parks like Tokyo Disneyland and Disneyland Paris. In 2014, Disney XD premiered a reimagined series about the Seven Dwarfs, simply titled The 7D, which ran for 2 seasons from 2014 to 2016. The series takes place 30 years before the events of the movie. The film even had a stage musical that started in 1969 and even went on to perform at Radio City Music Hall in New York City from 1979 to 1980 with over 100 performances. The film left such a cultural significance for the film industry that in 1989, the film was selected for preservation by the Library of Congress for being culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. In the end, the film may be regarded as the greatest animated film ever made, but the film has been given a more suited title in recent years as the movie that initiated Disney's legacy, and of course we can't forget that this film was the one that started it all, and it will forever be the fairest of them all.